Next on KQED Newsroom, dying orchards, parched fields.
We've got good years and bad years. This is, I call it worst years. This is really bad.
California's extreme drought and the future of the state's water supply. Good evening and welcome to KQED Newsroom. I'm Thuy Vu.
And I'm Scott Schaefer. California desperately needs rain. The drought that began in 2011 has grown worse every year since.
And if you have any doubt about the drought's impact, take a look at these pictures. This was Folsom Reservoir in 2011. And this is what the reservoir looked like after 3 years of drought. This was Lake Oroville in 2011. And this is what the lake looks like last year. And this is what the snowpack looks like in 2013. And this is what it looks like just a year later. State officials say the Sierra snowpack is near record lows, and any late season rainfall won't have much of an impact. In the Central Valley, farmers are watching their crops wither, and ranchers are selling off cattle to pay for hay to feed their remaining cows.
I gotta sell more cattle so I can buy more hay.
So the herd gets smaller and smaller.
And I'm getting poorer and poorer.
Farmers who are able to are drilling wells, pumping water from reservoirs deep underground to save their crops. But the water levels in those reservoirs, known as aquifers, is dropping. And in some areas, the ground is sinking as a result.
To what extent do you feel like we can only punch so many holes and pull out so much water before we really start seeing huge problems?
Well, I mean, we're to that stage right now, I think, because the deeper you go on some of this, you're losing out on water quality too. You're going to get down so deep and the water's going to start getting salty on you.
Some California counties are looking to the ocean to shore up their water supplies. In San Diego, construction crews are finishing a $954 million desalination plant that will turn seawater into fresh water.
Because the Pacific Ocean is not dependent upon snowpack or rainfall. It's always going to be there, the largest reservoir in the world, if for that matter. And so here we have a truly drought-proof supply.
The plant is scheduled to run tests this spring, and water officials hope it will be up and running next year. 15 more desalination plants are proposed for up and down the California coast. Throughout the year, we'll be examining the effects of the drought on California.
Tonight, we're talking with people who are dealing directly with the drought's impact. Beau Goldie, Chief Executive of the Santa Clara Valley Water District. Felicia Marcus, Chair of the State Water Resources Control Board. And Paul Wenger, a farmer and the President of the California Farm Bureau Federation. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Felicia, I wanted to begin with you. How bad is this drought? Are we going to run out of water?
Well, it's the most horrendous drought that any of us have seen, and certainly that our parents or grandparents have seen. I mean, we've had years where you can quibble over whether there was less water, but the fact is, since the last time there was this little water, we have millions more people. We have more irrigated agriculture dependent on each drop of water, precisely because agriculture has become far more efficient and has produced a miracle of food and fiber with the water they have.
And of course, we don't know how long it's going to last.
We don't know how long it's going to last. We have more threatened and endangered species who don't have the resilience to weather it, and we absolutely don't know how long it's going to last. Australia had one that lasted over a decade after thinking they were in a 3-year drought.
Some researchers are predicting that California may run out of water in a year. What do you think of that?
Well, I think it's hard to say. I mean, we have used a lot of our water, and I've heard some of those stories. It really depends on where you are. I mean, every area of California has a different mix of water sources. Some have their own imported water that they take hundreds of miles, like the San Francisco Bay Area, or LA has their Owens Valley supply. Others are dependent on the state and federal water projects in whole or in part, and that's had a dismal few years, and other people are fortunate enough to be over a groundwater basin that's flush, and others have no groundwater at all, like San Diego, which is why they need to invest in desal in such a big way.
Paul, you're an almond farmer in Modesto, and of course we've been seeing lots of almond trees being planted throughout the Central Valley. They're very lucrative, but unlike, say, row crops, tomatoes, and fruits and other vegetables, you can't lay them fallow for a year. Right. You have to water them or the trees die. Yeah. So what would you say to critics who say, well, farmers are really kind of hardening their demand for water, because once these trees are in the ground, you can make a good argument. We need the water. We can't just let them die. That would be a terrible waste.
Yeah, we have seen a transition for some of the seasonal crops to more of the perennial crops, although I would say that a great majority of the investment that we're seeing today going into permanent crops is not farmers. They're investors. We have investors coming from all over the world, all over the country, all over the state. I farm 150 acres of almonds. There's a lot of folks in your viewing area that own a lot more almonds than that. And yet if the price of almonds was to go down by half, it wouldn't affect their lifestyle at all. It's whether they're investing their money, to me, it would change my lifestyle altogether. And so we are seeing a lot of investment into the permanent crops now from outside investors.
There was a PPIC report, a Public Policy Institute of California, showing that 50% of the water in California supports 1% of the economy, which is agriculture.
Right.
Is that sustainable?
Well, I guess at the end of the day, we hear that a lot from folks. They say, well, it's only going for food, and so should farmers be using that water? Who is really using that water? It's the consumer. And so one of the very basic things, and you talk in the high-tech industry where Beau is from, and you start looking about what their gross domestic product is, it's huge. But every one of those people eat 3 times a day. Where is that food going to come from? It's ironic that we talk about buy your food local. In California, we're the 6th largest agricultural economy in the world. We're feeding not only our state and the country, but a good part of the world. We do that because we've been able to manage our water resources.
Beau, let's turn to consumers for a moment. Last week, your district, the Santa Clara Valley Water District, proposed a 31% rate hike, saying that costs associated with the drought, including lost revenue from conservation, made it necessary. This week, you dropped that proposed rate hike down to 19%, but a lot of people are still very unhappy. They feel like they're being punished for conserving water. Well, what do you tell them?
Well, we really appreciate those who have taken the efforts to conserve water, and we need that to continue. We still need to be able to bring in the supplies to provide the community the water supplies that we have for Santa Clara County and the community out there. It costs to be able to bring in this water. So this last year, the last few years, we actually have been taking those extra cost and actually been cutting budget, reducing that so we can absorb those over the last few years of the drought. This current year, the one that we're working on right now, is actually looking at about a $60 million cost associated with that. Some of that is lost revenue, about 20%. The remainder is actually purchasing water, the water conservation programs that we have in place, doing outreach, bringing water that we have stored in the bank in Southern California, bringing that up and using that water. And we've actually made reductions to absorb most of that cost, so the increase is only about $27 million.
But there's no real incentive for consumers to conserve, is there? Because everybody across the board is paying more whether or not you saved water.
Right. Well, those that actually conserve actually save money by conserving water. What we're actually funding is incentives to replace, like lawns. We spent last year about $10 million just to replace turf, and that's a permanent solution. In Santa Clara County, it's been about 70 acres of lawn that has been replaced in this last year.
There are those, though, who will argue that agencies such as yours should do a better job of controlling your costs, and therefore these rate hikes wouldn't be necessary. As you know, there have been county civil grand jury reports in the past that have been critical of the way your agency spends money, also critical of high salaries for top executives, including yourself. You make about $300,000 a year.
Right.
How do you respond to that?
Well, if you look at what the organization has done in terms of the cost, just as I referred to, $60 million in cost. We have reduced the organization's cost, and to be able to address that, down to $27 million. The $27 million is that rate. We're still looking. We haven't set the rate. We're down to about 19%. Our board is taking us further to see how we can further reduce costs. When you look at the salaries, for example, mine has been in the news. I really appreciate, that the board has recognized the extra efforts and the responsiveness and the aggressive pursuit of conservation and managing this drought. But when you look at a $470 million budget for this organization, my salary increase is not driving the rates. It is really the cost of water, the conservation programs we put in place. That's what's really driving the cost.
Felicia, next week, your organization, your board, is going to be considering new controls on lawn watering, restaurants serving water, and maybe requiring them not to give it unless a customer asks, those kinds of things. Given the severity of this drought, isn't that the kind of thing that maybe should have been done in retrospect last year or the year before? And wouldn't it make more sense to just have mandatory rationing?
Well, it's an interesting question. I mean, water historically in California has been managed very locally because every community has a different mix of water sources. Last year, because the governor gave us the authority, emergency regulatory authority, we were the first state in the country to ever do conservation regulations statewide. And our goal has been to leverage more action at the local level, not to stand in the shoes of thousands of local water agencies to make decisions. What we've been trying to do is to make clear that there are certain things that aren't okay, and that certain things go to the level of being wasteful and
Like what, for
unreasonable.
example?
Like watering your lawn so much that it runs off into the street.
What's the penalty for that, though?
Well, it's a range. Again, enforcement in these things, I came out of local government as well years ago in Los Angeles, it's progressive enforcement. It's a lot is if you go out and you talk to people, it helps make a big difference, and then you can escalate it up. And we added a $500 fine, which got a tremendous amount of news, not because we thought a $500 fine was the way to do it, but because we were trying to enable local authorities to use that as a tool if they needed to.
How many people have been fined $500?
I actually don't know. We are asking for that in the new regulations because we want to know what enforcement actions people have taken so we can have a sense of, are there certain things that are more effective than others, because we fully intend to go further if we need to. Our hope is that local agencies are going to heed the call and take more action, and a number of them in this fourth year of drought have it on their agendas in the next month or two, but we're already preparing for what the next phase would be.
Speaking of local agencies then, Beau, why is there no mandatory rationing in any Silicon Valley city?
So what you're looking at right now, and Felicia's correct, different communities have different water supplies. For example, in our county, we have this large groundwater basin. We've been managing that to get us through droughts. Going back to the fines that are there, what we've put in place, and one of the costs we put in place, is actually water waste inspectors. And so we put together a mechanism so people can actually report if they see a condition where somebody's wasting water. Now, we don't run in and fine them right away. What we will do is go in and educate them. What we find is most people, once they get educated or made aware of it, correct the behavior, and that's what we're looking for.
I wonder, is there some kind of a psychology to rolling out conservation? In other words, you can't, just roll it all out at once. We saw that last month or in January, people were using more water again, so they've forgotten the message, or maybe because it rained a little bit in December. But like, what's the psychology of it? How do you strategize so that the messages and the steps you're taking are most effective?
So one of the challenges is people turn on the tap and the water comes out.
Right.
They don't know where it comes from. They're very busy all day long getting the kids to school. So it's hard to break through that. One of the programs we put in place is Brown is the New Green. And that goes to lawns because we're asking people to not water. Lawns go brown. But by having a sign on front of your lawn, we have found that they then reflect that, wow, that's the community thing. That's what we should be doing. So those then had green lawns start to change their behavior a little bit, and that has been very effective.
So shame, you're saying.
It's
raising
shame.
Consciousness.
It's wanting to be part of a community. I mean, I years ago rolled out large-scale recycling programs, and a lot of people said, oh, no one's going to want to be inconvenienced, and I found quite the opposite. People really do want to be a part of their community, but as Beau said, they lead very busy lives. They don't know, and agencies have done an incredible job conveying water over hundreds of miles to get it to them, and so it comes out the tap. And so the trick is that local agencies need to be stepping up because they're the ones in relationship with their communities.
And we're talking a lot about urban users, but Paul, I wanted to turn to you for a moment because farmers use 80% of the water that people use in California. Urban areas use about 20%. What do you say to people in areas like the Bay Area, Sacramento, Southern California, who feel like it really doesn't matter how much they conserve because no matter what the farms will always use more than them?
Yeah, I think that 80% figure gets thrown around a lot, and maybe you're talking about developed water, but I know City of San Francisco, Modesto Irrigation District, which is my irrigation district, Turlock Irrigation District, together own Don Pedro Reservoir. That was built, and as farmers, we had to pay for our part of that reservoir as a bonded indebtedness, just like you had to pay your property tax. There's more and more of that water is being released for the environment we don't get to use. We built the reservoir. The public didn't build the reservoir. The City of San Francisco and the farmers in Modesto and Turlock built the reservoir. But now, because of regulations, we're having to release water for fish, and we're not going to use that water, but yet because it was stored behind that reservoir, they're saying, oh, that's stored water that agriculture is using, but yet we're having to use it, for environmental purposes. And so we're having a restriction this year of 16 inches of water that we had never had. We went through 6 years of drought from 88 to 93, no restrictions. Well, we restricted to 2 feet, plus you could buy more. We take about 30 to 36 inches of water to grow our crops in an average year, And that can vary depending upon your soil type and your crop.
What have farmers been doing to conserve water? Because I hear that all the time. Oh, we're much more efficient than we used to be. But what steps have been taken?
We are far more efficient. Actually, micro irrigation can use more water than flood irrigation, not less. But what you can do is get more product for the gallon of water, so that's efficiency. And so a lot of our tomato producers, they go on buried drip, and so they can actually use more water, will actually use more water, but they're getting more pounds of tomatoes, and so they're getting more pounds of product per gallon. So that's efficiency. We are seeing, though, where we're going into a lot more permanent crops because that's what the world demands. I mean, we're not only marketing here in California, United States, but we're producing food for the world, and they want those products.
But what would you say to critics who might say, well, yeah, those almonds are going to China, you know, and that they're very profitable, and there's a huge demand over there, but look what impact it's having here in California.
Well, not only that, but the tremendous amount of water it takes to grow the nuts. I mean, it takes about a gallon of water to grow a single almond, nearly 5 gallons to grow a single walnut. Does all the water it takes to grow all those nuts, is that outweighed by the economic factors that you just mentioned?
That water is recycled. That water isn't being shipped overseas. How much do we import from around the world? Everything has a water component. We are importing far more water than we're exporting our agricultural products by exponential numbers. You can't drink it, but that was still taking water someplace in the world. We're a world economy. And so we're importing everything you go into your stores, most of it's coming from China and other parts of the world. Every one of them had a water component, everything.
But might we get to the point where we say, you know what, given we're in the 5th, 6th, 7th year of a drought, you know, we just can't do it?
I think that people want to jump to a simple answer, and I want to elaborate on what Paul was saying, that whether it's 80, 20, 70, 30 developed water or a different math, I think it's an artificial distinction where people want to point to someone else. I think the farmers in California are growing food and fiber that helps people. It does something productive. People in urban areas, again, as disconnected, and this is no judgment on them, they're disconnected from where their water comes from because we've had a system that they can turn the tap on and water comes. It's a miracle. It's one of the defining characters of our civilization. They also take for granted where their food comes from and the water content of their everyday life. I think many Californians in urban California are far more connected to a farmer in the Central Valley than they are to their next door neighbor who's running a hose on their lawn and wasting water. So, but they just don't know it. And I think the fact is that as the future comes, that we're going to have to figure out how to be more efficient and use water as many times as possible. And in urban areas, there's just a lot more you can do. Again, as long as people are wasting water, watering lawns they don't even think about or don't play ball on with a little kid, I think picking on almonds doesn't make a lot of sense, frankly.
Are there lessons in efficiency that you have learned from previous droughts and also what has happened in other countries? Felicia, you mentioned Australia had a 10-year drought. What has been learned from that, and what can we put in place here in California?
Thank you for asking. There's a lot of lessons to learn from Australia and a lot of lessons to be learned from parts of California. I mean, we actually, because we deal with water in such a fragmented way, there are incredible opportunities for more efficient use. Conservation is one, of course, with fixtures, appliances, changing out lawns, all kinds of things. Just the practice of using water to hose something down where you can use a broom instead. There's plenty of that. But also recycling, water recycling, such as the work that's been being pioneered at Santa Clara Valley Water District, in my former city of Los Angeles, in Orange County, and San Diego, and many countries, other countries do that. We can recycle water over and over versus taking highly treated water, using it once, sending it to a treatment plant, and then trying to get it to the ocean as quickly as possible. We can reuse that water over and over again, as they do in Australia, in places, or in Israel. And then you also have stormwater capture, which is increasingly being done. LA has grand plans to capture the water that they've been shunting down their flood control districts and create green space, infiltrate it into groundwater.
And you have wastewater recycling in the Santa Clara Valley Water District.
Yeah, let me go back to the lessons learned. So the last drought was around 1991. We instituted, many of the water agencies instituted about 22 different conservation programs, from low flow toilets to turf replacement, etc. And you can see that over this period of time to where we are today, there's been a 25% growth in population using the same amount of water. There hasn't been an increase in demand. You talk about purified water. So currently, I think the future, at least it's future for Santa Clara County, is really to take the recycled water, treat that to a much higher quality level. That gets to the point where you could actually drink it. But our plan is to actually put that into the groundwater basin, which is really where the various wells are. That will help prevent subsidence, which is the sinking of the ground surface, and that's really a very efficient and effective mechanism to do that.
What is your sense, and I'll ask any of you, how much more room is there for conservation? Because as you said, we've gotten much better. We're much more efficient than we were in '91. So what's
There's a lot more room for conservation. I mean, we haven't changed out all the toilets to low flow. There are appliance standards for dishwashers and washing machines have become much more efficient if you put new ones in, and then you only use them when they're full. Again, changing out lawns. I mean, the reason we focused on our regs on outdoor irrigation is that people don't realize that 50% of residential water use is outside, frequently on a lawn that just came with the house, that people are overwatering. That's pure waste.
And there's still places in California where there's no water meters. Sacramento area,
right.
Fresno. I mean, how can that be?
Well,
you know, it's interesting. I just want to interject because a little bit. And you said what we said here earlier: stormwater capture, gray water recycling. Those are all things where we can use the water multiple times.
Right.
We keep talking about conservation for a growing country, a growing state, and a growing world. When are we going to talk about increasing the supply? Because how many of us today would like to say, you know what, we're not going to be able to make another dollar the rest of our lives. Whatever we have in our bank account, whatever we have invested in our homes or anything, we're going to have to get through until we live to our ripe old age. We're going to have to conserve. Don't we want to add to our bank account? But yet in California, we have not added to our bank account. Los Angeles has. The one area of the state, this is the driest area of the state, has invested in infrastructure, Diamond Valley Reservoir, and the rest of the state was complaining because LA didn't realize they were in a drought last year. But they invested in infrastructure, and we have not.
Yeah, and I want to come back to the water meter question, but in terms of water storage, I mean, Prop 1 passed, and that's going to include some water storage capacity, but that doesn't really help you in a year like in a drought, right? You have to have rain to store.
Well, it allows you to store more during the wet years, and storage means a lot of things. It means surface storage. It means groundwater storage, which is why historic groundwater legislation was passed last year. It was very controversial, but we see the loss of snowpack as something that's going to become more regular under climate change, and the groundwater basins are the only thing of the size that can actually compensate for that. But it also means small storage all over the place. I mean, the Diamond Valley Reservoir, $3.5 billion Southern California paid to build that reservoir, and then they put water in it during wet years and built up that bank account. We need to do that.
Well, speaking of storage and dams, Felicia, the law requires that dams release water for fish and that water be left in the delta for fish. But if towns are running out of water, can those laws be loosened, and should they be even if they drive certain species to extinction?
Well, I think there's still plenty of room for balance there. I think the standards for fish, it depends on who you're talking to. Some people resent them, and it's a challenge because the standards that have come in for fish since the 70s and 80s have in fact redirected water that folks were relying on for a long time. But our species are also important, not just for the idea of them, but for commercial fishermen who also rely on it, just as farmers rely on water to grow their crops. In fact, a lot of flexibility has happened during the past few years where fish standards have been cut by various agencies, including mine, to make up for that, to deal with the fact that particularly when you're dealing with public health and safety issues, you want to make sure the water's there. But that amount of water isn't going to make a difference in the drought. It makes a difference to someone, but we need species, we need public health and safety, and we need agriculture. And so it's really arguing over the margins. Everybody's getting hurt. Species are being decimated.
Beau wants to jump in.
There's not one solution here. Correct. You need storage. We need reservoirs to provide storage. A lot of those reservoirs are actually providing cold water fisheries. But
Correct.
What we have done when we built California is we built it for human consumption, human use. We didn't plan for the fisheries. If we were to go back 100 years before we did all this, and we were thinking we had human consumption as well as fish, we would have been a better job of planning. So it takes conservation. There's still a lot of room to do conservation. Storage is critical. Recycled water and desal. Your reservoirs, your photographs at the beginning of the slide showed the reservoirs that carried us through to where we are.
Is desal viable, though? I mean, it costs a lot of money, and it has certain threats to the environment. Yeah. Fish can be sucked in.
It depends. I mean, I think desal is a part of the portfolio, and this administration has a water action plan, which is an all of the above strategy versus arguing over one or the other. We're not going to just conserve our way to the future. We're not going to just store our way to the future. We have to augment supply through recycling and stormwater capture. Desal has a place in that portfolio in a place like San Diego where they don't have groundwater basins that they can manage conjunctively, where they're very junior water rights holders at the end of the pipe. They feel that that's an important piece of the portfolio. Some places on the Central Coast don't have some of the same options as folks near the Sierras, and so it'll play a role, but it does have some environmental consequences, energy consumption, and it's more expensive, so it's a tool to be used in the appropriate
I know we'll get letters if we don't come back to the water meters. So just quickly tell us, why is it that there are still places where we're not even measuring how much water people are using?
Well, I think people have taken it for granted. I mean, now state law is requiring it, but it had a very, very long lead time, and we should be metering water all over the place. You cannot manage what you don't measure, and it's good that Sacramento voted to accelerate their hunt, and we gave low-cost loans to Fresno. They applied for it to accelerate theirs. But really being able to measure how we use water is an essential phase to figuring out how to manage it, not just in the large scale, but even in the smaller scale. The public needs to know how much they're using so that they can use that. Energy has gone much further in this regard where they can tell where their water use is. It'd be fabulous in the places like Sacramento that are going to smart meters. People are going to be able to tell where there are leaks because all of a sudden they know that they're running water at 2 a.m. or they're going to know they're using it outside. And people get very clever once you give them information.
All right, we are running short on time. We could have a whole other conversation about smart meters.
Yeah.
I know that. And so much more to talk about here as well. But thank you all very much. Felicia Marcus from the State Water Board, Paul Wenger from the California Farm Bureau Federation, and Beau Goldie from the Santa Clara Valley Water District. Thanks to all of you very much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
I have a feeling you're all coming back on the show probably
That
in
went
a
way
few
too
months.
fast. That went way too fast.
I thought one of the things for your viewing audience.
Just we got to wrap it
better
up.
sign
We'll
off,
continue talking at the
unfortunately,
end.
But thank you. For all of KQED's news coverage, please go to kqednews.org.
I'm Scott Schaefer. Thanks for joining us.
And I'm Tui Vu. Have a good night.